Good evening, and welcome to the final program of the 2024-25 Writers in Residences series. We are completing our 5th year of the Writers in Residences, and we thank you for attending and hope you've really been enjoying the series. I am Lauren Firestone, and along with David Ehrlich and Carol Kornhauser, coordinate the Writers in Residences series. It's wonderful that so many of you are joining us tonight to hear Alex Brunner speak to us about his uncle, József Debreczeni's book, Cold Crematorium, Reporting from the Land of Auschwitz. If you haven't already, please mute your audio and preferably view in speaker mode. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and our moderator, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, will be taking the questions off the chat. As a reminder, this program is being recorded. The Writers in Residences program is presented by the Jewish Community Alliance of Lancaster, whose mission is to enhance and promote Jewish life, identity, and continuity, and to generate financial resources to develop and support diverse programs such as this one. We appreciate all the support that JCAL and Miriam Baumgartner, the president of JCAL, has given to the WIR series. All of the authors come to us through the Jewish Book Council's Author on Tour program, whose mission is to enrich Jewish communities through the literary arts and to encourage and promote reading, writing, and the publication of books of Jewish interest. The three coordinators will be attending the next Authors Conference, which is at the end of May, through the Jewish Book Council, and will begin to choose books for the 6th year of the WIR series. The WIR series is sponsored by the family of Beth Pomerantz, and tonight's event is sponsored by both Temple Bethel's Lifelong Learning Fund and Merrill Shachtman. We appreciate and thank all of our sponsors. Now I'd like to turn it over to Carol Kornhauser, who will be introducing our moderator for the evening.
Good evening. Katarzyna Jakubiak is Associate Professor of English at Millersville University of Pennsylvania. Kasia, as she is known, was born and raised in Poland and emigrated to the United States in the early 2000s to pursue her academic career. She holds a PhD in English Studies from Illinois State University. Her academic and teaching interests span a wide range of subjects, including translation, creative nonfiction writing, comparative literature, African American literature, and post-colonial studies. In her courses at Millersville, Kasia guides students to explore the ways in which literary works can be witnesses to historical events, and she invites students to become writer witnesses themselves. Her scholarly publications focus mainly on cultural and political dimensions of translation. For example, she discusses how Polish translations of African American literature during the Cold War provided a venue for exploring Polish-Jewish relations at the time. She is also the author of the collection of personal essays, Obce Stany, translated Alien States, published in Poland in 2022. Kasia?
Thank you, Carol, for introducing me. I am honored to have been asked to moderate this program tonight. As everyone knows, we're meeting to discuss a book in translation, which is a great interest of mine. We will be talking about Cold Crematorium by József Debreczeni, written originally in Hungarian and published in 1950. It is a truly haunting book. It is a devastating, hard read. I have to say it was really emotionally hard for me very often to get through the descriptions of what the author calls the land of Auschwitz. But it is also a very important read, and some of the reviews call it a required read. We are really lucky and we're honored to have with us Alexander Brunner, who is the author's nephew. And he was instrumental in bringing this book into the English language, and just instrumental in resurrecting this memoir, right, which was published so many years ago. As a result of bringing this book into the English translation, now the book is available in 16 languages. So it's all thanks to Alex. And Alex will give us a presentation about the book and about his uncle. But I would like to say a few words about Alex too. Alex Brunner is a former international management consultant and fundraiser. He's a child of Holocaust survivors from Yugoslavia who remained in Europe after World War II. He has lived and worked on 3 continents. His special interest is the history of the Jewish people. He lectures about Israel, the Middle East, and anti-Semitism. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in chemical engineering from the University of Maryland and an MBA from Harvard Business School. He's also a member of the board of the Olga Legal Institute for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights. So now I'm going to turn it over to Alex, and thank you again for joining us. And let's hear this wonderful presentation that you have for us.
Thank you, Kasia, for that very warm introduction, and thank you all for joining us this evening. So I will be speaking about my uncle's book, but I would be remiss if I did not mention that it's only a few days after the commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which is in Israel and in the Jewish world is recognized as Holocaust Remembrance Day. And, my uncle did not have a weapon to fight with, not a gun, not a grenade, but he did have a pen. And he used this pen to be a witness and to bring those people who were murdered to life. And he had a special talent, and I think the book really does that. So I'm going to share a screen now, tell you a little bit about him, our family, and the book. So let's go. And share screen. Okay, 1, 2. Okay, and for some reason.
Yeah, Alex.
Okay, hang on,
there you go.
hang on. Just hang on 1 second. Just hang on. How is that? You should see a screen, cold crematorium reporting from the land of Auschwitz. Do you see that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we are all set. So as Kasia mentioned, cold crematorium is my uncle's firsthand narrative about the horrific journey through what he referred to as the land of Auschwitz, which was this enormous system of concentration, slave labor, and death camps set up by the Nazi German regime in occupied Europe during World War II. And the book was published first in Hungary and in Yugoslavia. And as I said a minute ago, it is very, I think, fitting that we are discussing it a few days after the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So this, some of you may know, is the famous Rappaport sculpture in central Warsaw, celebrating the Warsaw Ghetto fighters. And Kasia has already mentioned I'm originally from Yugoslavia, the family's from Yugoslavia, and I will speak about the collapse of Yugoslavia later on. What I wanted to mention here is that the ghetto fighters, with practically no arms, were able to hold off the German troops for more than 2 months, while the Yugoslav army collapsed in less than 2 2 weeks. So my uncle's book is an act of defiance, and he was saying, see, I am still here. And to clarify, there's my uncle and me a long time ago. This would have been in the late 50s. To clarify, my uncle was my father's elder brother, so he was József Brunner. He took on Debreczeni as his writer's name as a young man. Debrecen is the town in Hungary where the Brunners first settled in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And immediately when it came out in Hungarian, in Yugoslavia, Hideg crematorium in Hungarian, in 1950, it was immediately recognized that this was a very special book with enormous literary merit. I'm going to let you read what one critic said. So my uncle was a journalist, and so he had an eye for detail, but he was also a poet at heart. And so he uses evocative prose. He sometimes relies on irony, on sarcasm, even on humor to compel the reader to imagine human beings in circumstances that are really impossible to comprehend intellectually. So you feel you're right there with him. So there's a scene where he describes how he's scrunched next to the cooling corpse of another prisoner who has just died. And he explains this is the 8th corpse that he has been next to. And when he describes it, you literally feel on your own skin his neighbor's corpse and how it is becoming colder by the minute. Now, I'll get into later on why it took so long for it to be published in a world language. It had to do mostly with politics, with the Cold War. But to jump ahead, January 2024, the book is translated and published simultaneously in New York and London by 2 of the major English-speaking presses in the world, Macmillan and Random House. It immediately gets enthusiastic response across the board. And as Kasia mentioned, since then, it has been translated and published in multiple languages. We are up to 19 languages now, and I hope we are going to add a lot more. Now, just to show you the impact, the literary impact and the remarkable status and stature that the book has received, Penguin Random House has a series of books that they consider the most important in modern literature. Books like Brave New World, Kill a Mockingbird, Gulag Archipelago, and this year they've added Cold Crematorium. The book has received a variety of prizes. The first 2 are American, Wingate is British, Spiegel is German. And so that's a little bit of background on the book. Let me tell you a little bit about Józsi, my uncle Józsi, because it's important for the book. It's also a lesson in Jewish history. So he was born in Budapest when that was the co-capital together with Vienna of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was on the losing side of World War I. In 1918, it fell apart. Hungary became an independent country, and almost immediately it was racked by political violence. First, a short-lived socialist revolution that was put down in a very bloody counter-revolution in which Jews were a particular target of the so-called White Terror. My paternal grandparents, my father and Józsi, fled to the neighboring Kingdom of Yugoslavia in 1919, which already had a large Hungarian-speaking minority. And interestingly, Józsi, even though he spoke perfect Serbian, he was always more comfortable in Hungarian, and virtually all of his works, including Cold Crematorium, were written in Hungarian. He finished high school in 1925 and started his career as a journalist in serving the Hungarian language community in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And very interestingly, and this illustrates sort of the quick ups and downs of Jewish history during, well, all over the world, but particularly in Europe in the 20th century. In 1932, he became sufficiently known in Yugoslavia that his reputation ricocheted back to Budapest, and he was recruited to come back to a prestigious editorship. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. By 1938, new anti-Semitic decrees were published in Hungary, and he was fired, left, and went back to Yugoslavia. Of course, much worse was on the way, and on April 6, 1941, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was attacked by Germany and its allies. As I mentioned previously, the Yugoslav army and government collapsed in less than 2 weeks. The country was carved up, and the fate of the Jewish community, well, it was a catastrophe. There were 82,000 Jews in Yugoslavia before World War II. 67,000 of them were murdered. There were very few routes to escape. One of them was getting into the Italian occupation zone. You can see how the former Yugoslavia was split up by the attacking countries, and you see the Italian zone in sort of a brown. And I will point out how this had an impact on certainly on my family. Józsi, his parents, and my mother, the two families didn't know each other. My father and mother met after the war. They were in that area, in that red oval. It's called Bachka. It's right next to Hungary. And the Jews of Bachka were subject to the same treatment, excuse me, as the Hungarian Jews. Now, Jews in Yugoslavia and all over Europe and all over the world had experienced all types of anti-Semitism over the centuries, discrimination, pogroms, and so on. But this was different. The Holocaust was different because there was no place to escape. The gates of the world were closed to Jews, America, Canada, Britain, everywhere. Even Palestine, this little strip of land that had been promised by the League of Nations, that is the predecessor organization to the United Nations, it had promised the Jews that there would be a Jewish home, national home. It was close to immigration after the Arab Revolt. And my relatives you can see in the middle there, you can see Sarajevo in today's Bosnia. They had already bought land in Palestine, and they were denied entry with catastrophic results. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, especially a few days after Yom Shoah and the week before Israel Independence Day. Had there been an Israel in 1938, rather than being proclaimed in 1948, however small it might have been, there would have been no Holocaust. So here is, this is Józsi. I think you will recognize him. There's his wife, Lenka, my paternal grandparents, Sidonia and Fabian, very well documented. There are literally lists of the Brunners who were deported. There were about 20,000 Jews, and they were deported together with about 600,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz and other death camps. Of the 4 family members there in the picture, only Józsi survived. I mentioned the Italian zone. My father and uncle are on the left-hand side. In the middle is my uncle. He's meeting the commander of Anglo-American forces in Italy. They both joined the partisan movement under Marshal Tito. And there is my Aunt Liana, who is a partisan in the Slovenian mountains in northern Yugoslavia. Now, what is the book about? It is a narrative of the 13 months from the time that Joži was deported from Bačka to liberation. So we start off April 44. He's deported. So that's number one. He's sent to number two, where Auschwitz, Birkenau, where the prisoners go through the infamous selectia, where most of them end up in the gas chambers. He, one of the lucky ones, goes to what is today Poland and was part of Greater Germany during the war, to slave labor camps. He was in 3 different slave labor camps, and he's there until May 1945 when he is liberated. Now, I'm going to play you an audio clip from the first chapter, so you get a sort of a little sense of the book. But before we do that, I want you to take a quick look and see or take note of those little squares, and you might be able to read. It says in one area, it says solid squares represent select camps. Because of map scale, not all camps can be shown or labeled. So each one of those is really the nexus of a network of camps, of sub-camps. And historians today know that there were more than 40,000 places in occupied Europe where Jews were ghettoized, murdered on the spot, or sent to slave death and extermination camps. So here we go.
The long train, comprised of low boxcars with German insignia, was grinding to a halt. "We're stopping." The word spread among the barely conscious, listless crowd. We suspected that we were nearing our destination. We'd been herded aboard 2.5 days earlier in Bačka Topola, and since then we'd stopped just twice, and only for a minute or two. On the first such occasion, some sort of thin soup was handed in through a gap wide enough to fit only the bowl containing it. The second time, the train slowed down along the open tracks. The bolts screeched open, and the German military police in grass-green uniforms barked shrilly, "Aussteigen! Zur Seite! Los, los! Exit! To the side! Come on, come on!" We stopped by an embankment awash with flowers and beside a little patch of woods. Who could say where we were? In Hungary, Slovakia, or perhaps Poland? The henchmen in their grass-green uniforms announced that we could relieve ourselves. "Going into the woods is prohibited. We will shoot at every suspicious movement." Hundreds upon hundreds of people stampeded toward the designated narrow space. Old women's fading eyes were grotesque mirrors of terror. 6 days earlier, these women had been sitting in their lovely old armchairs, talking of Sunday lunch. They'd been listening to the radio and looking out at their yards from the living rooms of their provincial homes, awaiting news of grandchildren away on forced labor service. Younger married women. Days earlier, they'd been sprinkling their bosoms and arms all over with eau de toilette and discreetly draping their skirts over their knees each time they sat down. Girls, 15, 16, 17 years old. They'd learnt to curtsy properly. At home, they'd left schoolbooks, perhaps a few timid love letters in ribbon-tied, paper lace-adorned boxes of chocolate, and wildflowers pressed between the pages of keepsake albums. Men, young and old, wide-eyed schoolboys and dishevelled adolescents. Grown-ups in their prime, men getting on in years, octogenarians. They run. They run. For 2 days, they had no way of relieving themselves. They spread their legs instinctively, squatting like animals. Urine collects in pools. Nearby, the camp guards in spick-and-span grass-green uniforms don't take their eyes off them. Not a line stirs on the faces of these guards. They aren't human, nor, any longer, are those people who are squatting. I believe that somewhere in Eastern Europe, an extraordinary metamorphosis took place at the edge of a verdant forest along a railway embankment. That is where the people of this tightly locked train of hell were transformed into animals. Just like all the others, the hundreds of thousands of people that the madness had sent spewing out of 15 countries towards factories of death and gas chambers.
So this is the infamous arrival ramp when the trains come in. The dead people who died during the journey are pulled off. The living are divided between men and the women and children, and then subdivided in turn in those who go to the right and those who go to the left. Yoshi learns about what happens to those who go to the left from a prisoner who had arrived previously.
He takes a deep, wheezing sniff. Those chimneys spew that filthy smoke day and night, he says slowly and quietly. A large-scale industry. If one day someone writes about what is happening over there, they'll be seen as either crazy or a perverse liar. You need only imagine. For months, for years, day in and day out, tightly locked trains from all over Europe have been pouring in here by the hour. They have those passengers who are still alive line up on that square of death in front of the station, as with all of you. Maybe, probably, at this moment, others are already standing in the very same place. At a glance, they sort those who seem weak and old and send them to the left. Then they announce that vile tale about the trucks. As for those who fall for it, they can only blame themselves. If you make your bed, you've got to lie on it. His voice has trailed off into a whisper. He looks around. He takes a long drag on the cigarette stub, the embers glowing with rage between his bloodless lips. Those trucks go straight to Birkenau. It starts the same way as here, in the bathhouse. Everything unfolds with systematic Teutonic planning. Es muss alles klappen. Everything must work out. It's in their blood. Panic must be avoided. So to ensure this, a veritable theatrical performance gets underway. Those unfortunates are first made to strip naked, just like all of you now. They too are shaved and deloused. They think they're going to bathe. Soap is even pressed into their hands. They are pushed through a doorway and, just like everyone else, they find themselves in a shower room. But instead of hot water, the showerheads spray gas. That's all there is to it. The only thing left is the crematorium, he continues. But the trains keep running towards Germany, full of women's clothes, men's clothes, and children's clothes. And with so much else. The bones become glue. Human hair is used for mattresses or pillows. There are mountains of children's hair. Krauts on Nazism to the umpteenth power. They are now in their element.
Before we move on, please take note of the title. Up to 12,000 Jews a day were murdered. 12,000 a day, day after day, week after week, month after month. I've been to the Auschwitz crematoria, and one of the things that I distinctly remember are the marks on the walls, scratch marks of the people as they realized what was happening. Frantically trying something, anything to get out of there. And you can see their fingernails marks. Now, as I mentioned previously, my uncle was one of the quote unquote lucky ones. This was his one of the places of his employment. This was called Project Reese. It was supposed to be a bolt hole for the Nazi leadership in case they had to flee Berlin. And I have to tell you, when I look at this, I cannot but think of the Hamas tunnels where the Israeli hostages are still being held and tortured. Now, in the next clip that I'm going to play, this is how József describes the taking away of the prisoner's individuality.
33031. That's my number. Starting now, I'm no longer me, but 33031. Much more a number than, say, an inmate with a life sentence, whose identity and possessions are kept in a prison office. I was never one for numbers. I didn't believe in their magic. My measure of value has always been words. My capacity to remember numbers is so weak that I've forgotten my own phone number at times. And yet, now, the sole distinguishing mark of my future existence is etched into me within moments. The family and given names among the voluminous data on my birth certificate, and the nicknames by which my mother and my sweetheart once called me disappear. 33031 33031 is what I'm called from now on. In this alone, and in nothing else, am I different from 74516 or 125993.
József, my uncle József, names the names of the companies where he worked. One of them was Sanger and Lanninger, and I've researched them. They have a website. They are engaged still in tunnel building, as you can see from their website. And there is absolutely nothing about their role in World War II or the use of slave labor. I mentioned my mother previously. She too was deported from Bachka, went through selection, and she worked, quote unquote, for this company that made carbon black and carbon rubber products used for war materiel. Again, the company has a website with a section on its history, nothing about World War II, nothing about the use of slave labor. Now, I want you to take a good look at this group of prisoners. They have been liberated by Soviet forces. These slave laborers, these were not slaves in the sense of, you know, what we may think of, sort of multiple generations, being used and the children being used. And no, these were expendable material. They were supposed to live 2, 4, or 6 months. Then they would fall, they would be unable to work, and they would go directly to the gas chambers. Now, these are the people who were still working, but look at them. Look at those legs. Hunger was the way that the Germans controlled and established a way of some of the prisoners to control other prisoners so that they could use a relatively small number of SS people in each camp. Now, when we speak about hunger, you have to understand this is hunger. You're getting 600 calories a day. We get 1,800 to 2,400 calories per day, and we don't work like József did, as he says. I'm on my feet 17 hours a day, at least 14 of those on back-breaking work. When every cell in your body is crying out for extra calories, people lose all sense, many people lose any sense of humanity. And József describes how even a father and a son would literally fight over a scrap of stale bread. Now, this is not what my uncle would have looked like. I will explain that in a second. But first, I want to play the final clip. It's very short. And I want you to see both the beauty of the language, but also the psychological techniques the Nazis use to break the spirit of the prisoners. By the way, you'll hear somebody referred to as half arm. This is a SS camp commander. And you will hear the use of Häftling. Häftling means prisoner.
Who is your best worker? 46514, the capo exclaims without hesitation. 46514 is inarguably the group's best worker. Back home, he'd been a logger. 26 years old. Nothing of his round, sunburnt peasant's face suggests Jewish ancestry. Not at all the spindly, bookish type more familiar back home. That variation that even Jews themselves hardly recognize. In the Carpathian Mountains, there's a healthier degree of occupational diversity among the Jews. Those doing work do it for the sake of the work itself. It's obvious from the way they hold their tools. 46514 is a premium Häftling. Premiums are rare. To be recognized as one is a big deal. A premium gets a weekly bonus worth 2 marks, which he can trade in for special jam and Majorca cigarettes. 46514 jumps out of the pit and snatches off his cap. Half-arm casts him a glance, but asks him nothing and then steps to the side. He reaches lazily for his holster, pulls out the revolver, and presses the barrel to 46514's temple. A shot rings out. The man, who'd been standing straight as a flagpole, now teeters before crashing face down into the pit. The lifeless body plops with a dull thud. The officer with the Leica puts the camera into a pocket while Half-Arm smiles silently, absent-mindedly. A little demonstration, he says. An example of how even the best Jew must croak. Kitsch. Horror is always kitsch, even when it's real. Half-Arm puts away the revolver and gets back into the car with his entourage. 15 steps away from us, 46514's ever colder lips are caressing the curse-soaked earth gone mad.
This is a great example of how something that could be just described as, he dies, he plops down. Here's what my uncle said. 15 steps away from us, 46514's ever colder lips are caressing the curse-soaked earth gone mad. So I said that my uncle did not look like that group of prisoners. He would have looked more like this poor man being examined by a Soviet doctor. And you may ask, well, this man obviously can't work. My uncle couldn't work. How is it that he and my uncle survived? Well, the answer is that in the latter part of the war, in very late 44 and early 45, local Nazi camp commanders knew that the war was lost, that the Allies were going to win. And they thought that they might be held personally accountable for the crimes in the camps. Now, we know none of that actually happened. Virtually all of the camp commanders and the camp personnel got away scot-free, but they didn't know that at that point. So rather than sending the weak prisoners, the ones who could no longer work, directly into the gas chambers, they sent them to so-called hospital, camp hospitals. And my uncle was in one called Dornau, and the prisoners called it the cold crematorium. And that's why the book is called The Cold Crematorium. And the significance of the name is obvious. It wasn't the gas chamber, the hot crematorium. It wasn't the gas chamber followed by the crematoria, but it was a cold crematoria because while they didn't have to work, these people, they were left naked. Their clothes were taken away. Their rations and were cut, and they died in droves. And the Germans even accelerated the death process by introducing typhus from other camps. Now, I mentioned the slave labor and the companies in Germany, and one of the things that my uncle spends quite a bit of time in the book is talking about how integral German companies were in the Nazi war machine, which is something that is often overlooked in World War II history. So virtually all of the well-known German companies today, Siemens, Bayer, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, they all, without exception, used slave labor. Now, the other thing that József talks about that I think is important is that the Holocaust would have been impossible without the collaboration of the local populations. So in the beginning, he's talking here, you can see on the left-hand side, none of us, meaning the prisoners in the cattle cars, knew about Auschwitz, but that bayonet adorned Hungarian policemen, the Germans had positioned every 50 meters along the road, they knew. And it wasn't just Eastern Europe. This is Dutch police who are deporting the Jews of Amsterdam, and they will be transported to death camps by the Dutch railroads. And this happened everywhere. Lodz, Brussels, Paris, you name it, wherever the Nazis were in control, the locals, the local police, and the local populations helped. And my uncle recognizes in the book what I call Holocaust, he didn't call it, I'm calling it Holocaust amnesia, starting even before the end of the war. Here's what he wrote. This is talking about the local people around the camp. Their bootlicking, which knows no bounds, is revolting. Right before our eyes, they make a big show of ripping up and spitting on Hitler's pictures. They have the gall to claim and even to swear that they hadn't a clue what thousands of people were undergoing in their immediate proximity. My uncle was always haunted that nobody would believe what happened. And it is hard, it's difficult for normal people to grasp the scale of the atrocities, the absolute evil. And he wasn't the only one. So Dwight Eisenhower, when he saw his first concentration camp being liberated, here's what he said. Get it all on record now. Get the films, get the witnesses, because somewhere down the road of history, some bastard will get up and say that this never happened. My uncle is buried in the Jewish cemetery in Belgrade. That's the capital of Serbia now, was the capital of Yugoslavia. And my sister and I have had the poem, which is really a preface to the book. It was written in 1949. The book was written in 1950. I'm going to read you the last three verses because I think it really conveys the rage, the impotence, the anger and anguish of my uncle. What's winter or the summer for when my mother's murderer still lives and thrives a fascist? He may yet live or he may not. He may yet breathe and stuff his gut. The priest might have absolved him. All his guilt is in the past. He finds a new uniform at last and poses where he killed her. My uncle wrote that in 1949. So 1949, there was still hope among decent people that the Nazi criminals and their accomplices would be brought to justice. And that's why József is saying, he says that he's saying that the murderer finds a new uniform. And he spent the rest of his life advocating for the capture and bringing to justice of Nazis from former Yugoslavia who were living openly in Austria and Germany and Italy. And he also had very harsh words for the Vatican that helped some very high-level Nazis escape to Latin America. In fact, now when I think about it, people didn't need uniforms. People didn't need uniforms. They were out in the open and unrepentant. This is an incredible book by historian Mary Fulbrook. I am going to let you read this yourself, but the takeaway is that of the German, this is just looking at Germany and Austria, she estimates that there were at least 250,000 people directly involved in the Holocaust, directly. And you can go down, you can see very few of them were tried, even few were convicted, and very, very few, considering the size of the industrial scale of the crimes, received any significant justice. We talk about Nuremberg. You know, Nuremberg, they had 25 people judged. They were brought to trial. Some were executed. But other than Nuremberg, there was almost nothing. The perpetrators got away scot-free, and you may ask, how could that possibly happen? The brutal truth is that both East and West in the Cold War competed for support. And going after the perpetrators of the Holocaust was not a popular strategy, because many, many people in the countries that had been allied or even occupied by Germany would have been caught in the dragnet of justice. And by the way, the US was just as complicit. There is Wernher von Braun, the darling of the American space program. He was a Nazi. He used slave labor. He and the top 100 scientists, Nazi scientists who worked for him, were spirited out of occupied Europe to the US. All was forgiven, and they became the core of the US rocket and ultimately space program. Now, I mentioned that cold crematorium came out in Hungarian, but in Yugoslavia, it was a minority language in former Yugoslavia. In the next year, 1951, it was translated into Serbo-Croatian. Now you don't hear about Serbo-Croatian, but it's Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, same language, the main language of Yugoslavia. And the reason that it was published in Yugoslavia, but nowhere else in Eastern Europe, was that until the fall of communism, the recognition of the Holocaust as a Jewish tragedy was taboo. Before the fall of communism, for example, you could go to Auschwitz and you could see the crematory, you could see the barracks and so on, but the word Jew never appeared. Even though 90% of the 1.1 million individuals murdered at the site were Jews, and they were murdered because they were Jews, and only because they were Jews. And in that sense, cold crematorium is important, not only from a literary sense, from a sense of remembrance, but because historically it bears eyewitness testimony. It's eyewitness to history. Jews were murdered because they were Jews, and the Holocaust was a unique event in world history. Of course, my uncle was not naive. He realized that millions of other groups were also victimized. He knew there were, later on he found out that 1 million people died only in Leningrad from hunger during the German siege of Leningrad. But the cattle cars going to Auschwitz from across Europe were filled 100% were Jews. The Holocaust was a unique event in world history because the idea was to annihilate, not enslave, annihilate an entire people down to the last individual. And we should have no illusions. The Jews of North America were also marked for death. This is a book that shows these are lists of Jews that have whose names have been gathered from temple directories and Jewish organization directories for the next step in the final solution. Now, I'm almost finished with my presentation. I do want to point out that my father, who went from the partisan movement to the Yugoslav Foreign Ministry and spent his entire career there, was stationed in Washington. That's him at the United Nations, but he was stationed in Washington when the book came out in 1950. He tried very hard to get American publishers to publish it in English. He was rebuffed at every point. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with the book because in the book, József points out, and it's the truth, that it was the Soviet army that liberated them. And my father always felt that what really killed the chances of the book was the last paragraph, where József describes how the liberated prisoners are leaving the camp and they're singing the Marxist, the communist anthem, the Internationale. And interestingly, the Jewish publishers were the most fearful of having anything to do with the book. Remember, this was the 1950s. This is during the trial of the Rosenbergs. It's the McCarthy era. It's the Cold War. It's the Red Scare. So I made it my project after I retired to get it published in a world language. And as you heard, we have had success. One of the things that really motivated me was I could see very clearly over decades how the Holocaust was not only being denied by more and more people, and not only on the traditional right-wing extreme, the Ku Klux Klan, white supremacists, but on a much broader scale. I obviously was aware that the witnesses, the actual survivors, were smaller and smaller in number every year. And I thought it was very important that the world know. And as I said, there is Holocaust distortion and denial. We have it here in the States. You have crazy people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. You have people on the news. Probably, though, the place that distortion of the Holocaust is certainly on the right end of the political spectrum, where it is most dangerous, is Germany itself, in spite of the fact that denial of the Holocaust in Germany is prohibited. There is a party called AfD, Alternative for Germany, that won 20% of the vote in the last election. I'm going to let you read how they view the Holocaust. And so I was very happy that Cold Crematorium got incredibly good reviews. It was a bestseller in Germany and is being integrated into, for example, in next month, there will be a public reading in Munich, which ironically is the birthplace of Nazism, where they will use Cold Crematorium as a discussion at the leading Holocaust museum to discuss the Holocaust, remembering Holocaust, and how do you make the Holocaust something that you learn, that new generations learn from. So I'm very pleased to hear that. The left wing, there is also a lot of Holocaust denial. On the left, that is a demonstration in front of the new Holocaust Museum in Amsterdam. There were 100,000 Jews, 80% of the 100,000 Jews were murdered. I'm speaking of the Dutch Jews. They didn't have a Holocaust museum for 80 years. Last year, they opened a Holocaust museum, and this is the type of demonstration you get. This is, of course, part of a much wider campaign to delegitimize Jewish history and the state of Israel. Now, I'm going to finish off to me, the most vile case of Holocaust distortion is the actual appropriation of Jewish suffering, what I call Holocaust inversion. You see signs like the picture on the left. On the right, this is the actual picture. These are Jewish inmates murdered, liberated by American and British troops at the end of World War II. The global BDS movement has been flooding the internet with this image and saying that these are Arabs who have been murdered by Jews, by the IDF in Israel in 1948. So I'm going to end up by saying something about, what is my uncle's book about? It is at its core a warning about the dangers of fanaticism and extremism. As he put it, he understood that the Nazis' war against the Jews was driven by a fanatical ideology. As he put it, Napoleon's soldiers carried marshals' batons in their haversacks. Hitler's Philistines carried castrating knives. Now, I want you to know that my uncle was a humanist, and he believed in coexistence. And in today's political vocabulary, he would have been a proponent, I'm sure, of the two states for two people solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. But he was anything but naive. And he would have immediately noted the similarities between Hitler's demonization of Jews and the writings of Hamas and the Iranian mullahs. And on that note, I'd like to finish and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Alex. So I am going to ask a few questions. We're like almost at the end of the program. But I am going to ask a few questions, and if anyone wants to ask a question, please put your questions in chat. So hopefully we'll have time to get to at least some. I want to add that poem that Alex read is also in the book. It opens the book, the poem about the mother's murderer. So I guess maybe I would like to start, to follow up with the topic of translation, because you just briefly mentioned the translation, but I know that you went to great lengths of choosing the right translator. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your criteria was for choosing the right translator, and what was most important for you in preserving your uncle's language.
So I understood that the only way I was going to get a publisher, serious publisher, was by being able to demonstrate to them the beauty of the language, how compelling it was, how he made you feel that you were right there. And so I went through a pretty complex process of identifying translators from Hungarian to English who had won awards for that type of translation. There are various organizations like PEN that give these awards out. I did my research, and I was looking for not only a translator from Hungarian to English, but also this type of work, which is called literary nonfiction. In other words, it's nonfiction, but has that literary quality. It's not, it's not just recitation of facts. And I gave each of the shortlisted candidates a portion of the book to translate. I met with them, I Zoomed with them, I met with the finalists in person to make sure that I could actually work with him. I was very lucky. I selected, I selected the right person, Paul Olshvari, who did a wonderful job. And I worked very closely with him. You, Kassia, as a translator, know that for every word in a different language, there are many choices that you can make in English. English is a very, very rich language, and each choice could have a slightly different meaning. And so I worked very hard with Paul to be able to, he is totally bilingual, natively bilingual, but he didn't know Bachka, he didn't know my uncle. And so I did everything we could in order to make it true to Józsi, to what he was, to what he wanted to say. Sometimes we would add little, if there was a word that would have been very alien to the Anglophone ear, we would, add an English word, or we would, in some way insert a little explanation. But and there were words that even I had problems with, especially the German. And I had to go around the Jewish, Serbian Jewish diaspora to find out what people thought of certain words. So it was quite an undertaking.
That's amazing. So yeah, like you were really involved in the process. You were working with the translator. And when you and I talked about this translation, you told me that you actually changed the subtitle of the book, right? So like the original subtitle was different, but you added the land of Auschwitz. So can you tell us why you decided?
Well, we added so the original Hungarian subtitle is, translating literally, is a novel of the Holocaust. I'm sorry, of Auschwitz. But in Hungarian, novel has a different meaning. Novel does not mean like it does in English. In English, it means it's fiction. In Hungarian, it doesn't. So we wanted to make sure that people understood this was not fiction. This was a first-hand eyewitness account. And that's why we said reporting from the land of Auschwitz. That's a great example.
Yeah. And I think it's really significant that you emphasize that land of Auschwitz, because this book really is about the land. It's like it's a different planet, right? And as you show on this map, like Auschwitz kind of became synonymous with concentration camps, but your uncle's book makes us aware that it wasn't just Auschwitz, that it was like this enormous network of camps. And he described, so he was in Auschwitz briefly. He was deported there and then sent to Eule. So he was in 3 camps. He was in Falkenberg, Fürstenstein, and then Dornau is the last one where there was that cult crematorium that you mentioned, where he was basically left to die. The other
Exactly.
2 were labor camps. So what's one of the unusual things about this memoir that I think distinguishes it from others, and you mentioned several elements that distinguish it, and you mentioned this one also that really caught my attention. So each camp that he goes to, he very meticulously describes the hierarchy of prisoners that were there. And that's a really surprising fact, I think, for many of us today. When he describes how the Nazis created this deliberate hierarchy. So I maybe I'll quote a little bit. With systematic resourcefulness, the Nazis created in their death camps subtle hierarchy of the pariahs. the Germans themselves remained mostly invisible behind the barbed wire. The allocation of food, the discipline, the direct supervision of work, and the first degree of terror in some executive power were in fact entrusted to slave drivers chosen randomly among the deportees. So in each camp, he describes how the Nazis are kind of hidden, and the real terror is executed through these prisoners with certain powers. So they were like elders and capos, right? And they were camp elders, they were room elders, they were even the kitchen workers. And it's your uncle really gives a good image of how the Nazis manipulated
he
these
wrote
prisoners.
it as he saw it. He wasn't trying to glorify. He was a true journalist. He saw it, he reported it, and he understood what was happening. He was an anthropologist in that sense. And he understood that for when you are hungry, and I mean hungry, not the way we talk about hunger in North America, you know, people will do things. They will cut deals. And sometimes people, they use that power to do awful things. He described, for example, the caning of a prisoner. And he says the guy who is beating the other prisoner knows that if he doesn't do it like, quote unquote, a real man, he's going to be the next one who will be beaten, caned. Of course, there are some people that he describes who use or in a position to use their position to help. So my uncle would not have survived had there not been a doctor who was a capo, but rather than using his, position to get more food and so on, he was an angel, and he helped. If it weren't for him, József would have died. Dr. Farkas.
Yeah. So yeah, he describes those who just fell into that Nazi scheme of manipulation. And I think it wasn't just physical manipulation through food, but some of it was psychological, right? Giving them access to power. So there were some that were really abusing that power, but then there were also some who use it for good, like he describes the doctors that you mentioned. So I don't see any questions. Miriam said, I'm rarely at a loss for words, and all I can say right now is wow. So I think it's the sentiment felt among all the audience here. Maybe I'll ask like last question. Another thing that struck me in this memoir is that your uncle writes very little about his life outside or before the camps. So he's just really focused on the reporting from that land of Auschwitz. And the quote that you played to us, the clip that you played to us, is really the only time that he mentions his mother and his wife, right? He talks about how he lost the name. He was given a number and lost the name. That was the nickname used by his mother and his sweetheart. And then other than that, he just mentioned that he was a court reporter, and he almost spends more time describing his fellow prisoners. Like there's a scene where when they all arrive in Auschwitz, he's there with people from his town, and he tells us, oh, this person was a photographer, and this person had a clothing store, and this is what this person was before they were all deported. But he doesn't really elaborate on himself.
So
Mm-hmm.
Kasia, so the reason is that his wife and his parents were not deported with him. They were on a different transport. He had no idea. I mean, he could probably summarize what was happening to them. But as I said, he was a reporter. He was reporting what he saw. So in that scene, he's describing the people, what they were before and so on. his wife, his mother, and his father were not there. So that's why he's not speaking about it.
Mhm.
But he did write other things. I mentioned another poem, I Speak to My Father, a very emotional a poem where he really vents his rage at the lack of, that nobody helped. They had nowhere to go, that nobody cared for them. All the gates were closed. And he says, who will avenge them? So his family was very much in his thoughts.
Mhm.
But this is about what happened in those 13 months. And that's it.
Mhm. Carol is asking, are you fluent in Hungarian, and why did your parents stay in Hungary, Europe after the war? Why did your parents?
Yeah, no, I'm not fluent in Hungarian. My parents, my father was also born in Budapest, but he spent his entire life in Yugoslavia, in Belgrade. My mother spoke Hungarian because everybody in that area spoke Hungarian in Bacska, as well as German and Serbian. And so they lived in and stayed in Europe, in Yugoslavia. Why did they stay? It may sound a little bit naive these days, but they were idealists, they were humanists. They believed that there was a new system that would people would be friends, and the ethnic groups would be, would collaborate, and the Jews wouldn't be picked on, and the economy would work, and they were wrong. But that was, they knew who fought against the Nazis. It was the communists, and they closed their eyes to other things, and so that's the story, their story, and the story of many, many other people.
So thank you very much for sharing these stories. I think
Very welcome.
we have to end now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alex Brunner, for being with us tonight and sharing your uncle's important book. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Professor Jakubiak, for moderating tonight's program. This is the last program of our 24-25 series. Thank you for joining us this evening and throughout the year. We hope you found the authors and their books interesting, thought-provoking, and worthy of your time. As Lauren mentioned at the beginning of the program, we will soon be choosing programs for our 2026 season, our sixth, in the coming weeks, and we'll announce the schedule in August.